Inclusion is the cornerstone of success. Inclusion is the result when you invite, speak, and listen. Inclusion works for individuals, families, and businesses. Your host, Tim Volk, promotes inclusion as part of his work with advisors and high net worth families. Tim is a change agent for inclusion. I'm Patrice Sikora. And Tim, now let's support all those rather bold statements I just made, shall we?
Absolutely. Hi, Patrice.
Hey, Tim. So now, inclusion, that is the topic here today. Inclusion. Yeah. It's usually part of the DEI formula, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Mm-hmm. How come it's the last one?
I don't know. I think it was a mistake. I think if we had inclusion at the front, it would have a much better reception. Right now, there's a lot of pushback on DEI. I don't know the reasoning behind it, but I think sometimes when people hear the diversity first, it brings up ideas that there's, some sort of quota or some sort of a standard that they have to meet. I think that it brings up affirmative action for some people. I think it's just the wrong way to begin the conversation. If we begin the conversation with the inclusion, which, if you think about it, families have been facing inclusion issues for thousands of years. I mean, how many stories do we hear about, the Italian family's daughter, and she falls in love with the Irish, farmer? Like, what are you kidding me? You can't marry an Irish who's not Italian. And then we see the movies like The Big Fat Greek Wedding, when he's like, do I know this Ian Miller? Do I know? Is he some good Greek boy? I don't know.
Windex works, though. Windex works.
Windex works. God. So I think that there's the concept of inclusion helps us frame where we're focused in our lives. Families are going to expand and change. Just the relationships are going to continue. The rising generation are going to find new people. They're going to marry. They're going to find boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever, and they're going to expand. And it's always a challenge for the family to expand and accept the new members. And so I think inclusion becomes one of the key pieces.
Well, I'm thinking without inclusion, there's no diversity and equity. So I think I agree with you.
That's right.
First.
I agree.
Yeah.
Because if we are good at inclusion, then maybe the diversity and equity kind of fall in line.
Yeah. They become a non-issue.
It's a non-issue.
Yeah. Tell me about what you've seen in families when it comes to inclusion.
There's so many good stories. And I think that one of the highlights that I recall, I've written a couple white papers, and I wrote a chapter in one of the family office manuals for Barbara Hauser and Global Law recently last year on this topic. And what prompted my thought process was I was watching Crazy Rich Asians with my mom, and she had not seen it. And the scene is, the son brings this girlfriend from New York who happens to be Chinese, and they go to visit his family for a wedding, for their best friend's wedding, his best friend's wedding. And unfortunately, he's never told his girlfriend that he comes from the Singapore family, the wealthiest family in Singapore. And she starts to figure it out when they think they're flying economy, and the first class people come up and get their luggage and take them to his exclusive way to get to the plane. And then they get their own little suite on the plane. And she's like, wait a minute. What are you not telling me? So they say, oh, we have some business with the airline. That's what my family does. So they go to the family home for this party, and it's a huge home. I mean, it's the home in Singapore, but what you realize is it's his childhood home. And they're in the childhood bedroom where he grew up. He accidentally, during the party, he spilled some red wine on his shirt and suit. So he goes up to the bedroom to change his clothes. And his mom follows him up there. And they're standing there. He's changed his shirt, and, they're putting the jacket on. And he's looking around the room for something. And she's like, are you looking for those cigars? Because I threw those out years ago. And she's like, your nanny wouldn't let me put out his nanny, whoever her name, wouldn't let me throw the clothes out. So there's clothes here, and it's your room. It'll always be your room. And so first it struck me that, okay, even though, people have money and the kids are born. They're children don't ask to be part of a wealthy family. They're just born. It just happens to be, if, we'd say it's, being part of a silver platter or gold spoon, but you don't know that. You're not planning that. That just happens. So that for the kid growing up, that's his bedroom. Okay, so you kind of have to put that framework in. And then he turns to his mom and says, Mom, I thought you'd be very pleased that the first girl I bring home is Chinese. And she turns and says something like, Chinese American, the worst. And I just fell out because no matter what culture you're in, if they're not your culture, if they're not your people, then you're considered the outsider. And so some of the families I've worked with the one good example is a lovely family that I had. They had a whole big group of brothers and sisters. And they kept referring, the wives or the husbands kept saying to me, they were the outlaws. My wife or my husband is the in-law, part of the family and the family business. And so I finally said, do you know that as we look at this today, is the way I look at it is that you are the senior generation now. You are the elders to the family. You're in your 70s. Some of you are in your 80s. And your children don't see you as the outlaw in-law. They see you as grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, uncle and aunt. Do they say to you, Aunt Susie, hello, Aunt Susie outlaw? Because Susie, aren't you the one that coordinates all of the family dinners and coordinates all the events? You and a group of people? Yes. I said, so do you think those children or grandchildren or nieces or nephews see you in that same light as you see yourself? No. I said, so where did this come from? And they said, well, it comes from, the parents told us we would never, when we got married early on, that we would never be involved in the business. And they kept reminding us of that it was their kids involved, but not the spouses. And I started to think, gosh, it's been going on for a long time. So you start to then overlay different religions. So if somebody's Jewish and they're marrying a Christian, if somebody is gay and they, first the fact that they be accepted as a gay member of the family, or LGBTQ plus, and then second, what's the person going to be like that they're with? Are they going to be able to accept it? So it's not only that they may be a different race or religion, but now they're also different sexuality than maybe what the family's used to. So you start to overlay all these elements that are probably been around for a long time. I don't think it's not a new thing to have LGBTQ people, but we certainly are seeing much more open conversation about it today, probably.
Have you seen it changing with the generations? More conversation with younger generations?
Mm. Yes, I would say, yeah. I think that the younger generations are much more cognizant and aware of this. Like, I think that
Is it
they,
positive though? Is it a positive discussion?
with the younger gen, or you mean with the way that people respond to them?
With the younger gen?
Yeah, I think it's positive. I don't know that they get positive response because I
Hmm?
think, a lot of times it's just like the movies. Like, what are you kidding me? Like in Big Fat Greek Wedding, when the dad says, "This didn't I tell you this is what happened when you educate women?" And she's like, "Oh, go away, go go." And then she looks at her daughter and she says, "Okay, Tula, you've had your fun. Now just end it." She's like, "But Mama, I love him." She's like, "Oh, Tula, eat something." And I think that's so common. Like, I don't think we realize how, that's something that it's inbred in our lives.
How do you start the conversation with a family?
I I like to start the conversation around love.
Okay.
And I think that I've not had a client that said they didn't love their children. I think there's clients that are frustrated with their kids, but they all love the children. And uh, I think that there's been, for some families, they've probably misstepped. And that's when I get brought in. Like, I think there's been some challenges in that acceptance. And I believe that if you have all voices at the table for a family, then you have a much higher likelihood of the success of the family, or the family, what we'd say, is flourishing. So if you don't have all voices at the table, there's a problem. So that's the first thing, is to try and recognize, do we have everyone at the table? And that's usually done through some sort of assessment. So the first thing is to have conversations with other people in the family and see where they're at, what their thoughts are, how they feel about things, how they feel about the family. And many times of the families I work with, there's family enterprise, whether it's a family office or it is an active enterprise or active businesses that they own. And so the dynamics are complicated by that. Who's involved in the business, who's not involved in the business. If we do an assessment with the family, it's sometimes the easiest way and most objective way to get information for the leadership of the family or the senior members. Because sometimes I don't think they can have clear, objective conversations with their younger generations. And typically there's no more than one, or these families can be large. One family we did, there were 42 family interviews that we did. It was a big
Wow.
family. There were 7 or 8 original of the adult children that were now the senior leadership in the family, and they had 17, 18 kids between them, or 20 kids between them all. And so then some of those have kids already. So you have to go through a process to sort of say, okay, what is your objective as the family, as the senior leaders? Because usually this is involved around the money or inheritance or passing on the family business, or trying to figure out how to create synergy in the family, or some collective flourishing of the family.
Mhm.
And in order to do that, I think we have to assess where everybody's at, and candidly, and then sort of objectively look at that. And if there's an issue, why?
You use the word flourish.
Mhm.
Talk about that.
Oof. It's a term that my mentor, James E. Hughes, or affectionately goes by J. Hughes, uses to have, and he wrote a book. He wrote a second book about a compact, flourishing families, a compact amongst generations. So J. Hughes wrote this book, Flourishing Families, a compact amongst generations. And the term is referring to the 5 capitals of the family. And we've talked about that in my practice. Most people are focused on the financial capital. Then you have the human, the intellectual capital, the social and spiritual capital of the family. So the human capital is just that, the people in the family, the value of the people. The intellectual capital is the brain power of the people in the family. And, there's some family members that are much more attuned to helping with the family enterprise or family business, or the wealth, stewarding the family's wealth. But almost everybody in the family is interested in the family. And the social capital is what are we going to do with the money? What's it mean? What's our purpose with this? And the spiritual capital is what binds us together as a family. What is our heritage, our goals? What are the values that we've passed on? What are the values that we have as a family that I've learned? So those 5 capitals, if we think about it, most people think that the financial capital is going to pull those 5 capitals up. But Jay's comment is that we flip it, and the capitals are at the bottom and support the human, intellectual, spiritual, social capitals. That's how a family flourishes, is identifying and nurturing all 5 capitals.
Can this translate to a business?
In the sense of the family business,
Mhm.
or a business? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Sure. In the especially if you're thinking about inclusion, right? Because the demographics of our society are changing. And by, the next 15 years, a dramatic change in the demographic forecast. The white male will not be the dominant part of our society by 2040, I believe the stats are. And even so, if we're not, we're still much more of a mixed society because of what's happened in people meeting and relationships changing. So we see a lot of ads where people are from mixed race or mixed couples or straight gay couples. It's interesting to see some of the ads that are running. But if you think about that going forward, and I think there's several studies right now, and Jay's even talked about this, that at the moment we believe that women control more wealth for the first time in history than men. And if you think about it, women live longer, so it's not like it shouldn't be a news flash for all of us. But the thought process around that is different, right? Because how many women feel like they are served well by the financial management industry, the wealth management industry? 70% of them, according to the Forbes article I read last week, are firing their clients, or the clients are firing their advisors. 70% of the clients, women, are firing their male advisors.
Where are they going? To another male
to
advisor or two
to
women?
female, if they can find the female,
Right.
which is a challenge. But also just trying to find people that have, I think, an increased sense of empathy. I think they are looking for an increased level of acceptance. They're not being talked over. They're not being talked to. Much more of a participatory conversation. And I think in the people's minds, it's less judgment, right? And I think that there are probably more sensitive parts of our society. There are cultural groups that are probably more sensitive to that. I know that a lot of times in the LGBTQ community, there are people that are very sensitive to talking about their estate planning, and they're trying to understand their financial planning, which includes estate planning, and they're not all comfortable necessarily identifying all the different components in their life with the people that are sitting in front of them because they don't feel like they're going to relate to it, and they're going to be in judgment. So inclusion in the advisory practice, for example, is really critical if you're going to stay in business and retain your clients. So it's good for business, good for client retention. It's good for attracting new clients. And if you think about it, you're going to have ability to attract new employees that are maybe a little different. And those employees will be able to target and target other markets that maybe you're not able to do well right now. Maybe you're not able to reach those customers right now. Maybe it's a hard time for you to reach Hispanic women. I don't know. I think that's the question we need to ask people. Are you inclusive in your practice?
That's a great question. And I would argue that at this point, maybe some people can say they are, but most advisors probably cannot.
I don't think it's just a wealth management industry either, because like I remember years ago going to boat shopping. Okay, so that's an unusual thing, right? Speedboat. Well,
Oh,
one of my girlfriends wanted to buy a speedboat. Now, happened to be a very well educated and very focused. She'd done all her research. A friend of mine, lesbian, who adore, and she wanted me to go with her because I love cars, and she thought, well, you'll like boats too. So I do. So I'm in this boat show, and she's arranged to go look at the specific model, make boat that she wants to buy. And we're standing on the boat in this boat show. And the people kept talking to me. And I said, you guys, you need to go talk to her. She's buying the boat. What do you mean?
did it finally click?
No, I said, she's buying the boat. She's writing the check. So it's for you? No, the boat's for her. And she's buying I'm hoping to ride in the boat, maybe water ski behind it. And I think one of the best things is to have friends buy the boat. So I'm encouraging this. But anyway, I was shocked. And I can't tell you how the number of because I'm a car nut, the number of women friends of mine that have asked me to go with them to buy cars.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know that it's just, but I don't think the wealth management, financial advisory world, I don't know that we're doing that much better of a job.
I don't think so. From a woman's point of view, I don't think so.
Really?
Yeah.
You see it?
I have seen it.
Yeah.
When it comes
So
to buying cars, I brought my son.
Oh my God. See?
Because I knew I wasn't going to get I wasn't going to get the respect that I wanted.
I think that this is indicative of what's happened for many, many years with families dealing with inclusion and just the natural expansion of the family. Some families do a beautiful job. Like I meet some families and they have integrated all the family members, all of they're encouraging the new relationships. They have sort of standards as to whether it gets serious or they become married, as to whether it involves them sitting on the family council. There's sort of there's rules in the
Mhm.
family governance as to what level that the spouse becomes a full-fledged participant in the family, let's say. But at least they identify that. But that's very few. I don't think there's a lot of families that do that.
As you've seen over the years, and you were talking about the demographics, more inclusion, hopefully, in families and in businesses at the
Mhm.
younger, the rising generation,
Yeah.
and the older generation steps aside or dies. Do you see it getting easier? Will inclusion become natural ever?
That's a really good question. Will inclusion become natural?
Will we not even think about it?
I do think that the younger generation, the rising gen, don't see color or race, or they don't see the same that perhaps their parents or grandparents. There are parts of the country where it's deeply embedded in the people in that area. And so my worry is that in some places it's not going to change. I'm fascinated today, and you've heard me say this before. I'm fascinated that we, as the gay community, the LGBTQ plus, but it's too many hard to say all the letters. So if I accidentally say gay community, I mean everybody. But we have still, I think the highest death rate in our community is suicide with kids between 17 and young people between 17 and 24. That we have homelessness at a staggering rate. That in some places 2/5, and in some places up to 4/5 of the homeless are LGBTQ living on the street because they've been kicked out of their home. So we are not getting the acceptance. We're not getting the inclusion that I think we should be, because I think we're having more of a conversation about being gay or LGBTQ plus than when I was growing up. And I grew up, I know you think I'm much younger than I am, Latrice, but the idea is that, and I grew up in Wyoming, so rural part of the country with a pretty progressive family that was well traveled. And so my family was much more, even with all of their exposure and friends, I think it's still sometimes hard to accept that your kid's different because you naturally go to the fear. So if you're living in a rural part of the world and you come out as gay, as a gay man, you worry about your child's life. Is it in danger? Right?
Yeah.
So, but that doesn't mean you don't accept them. Because my family's always said, when I came out, we love you. You're my son. I will always love you. You're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. It's just difficult at times. There's always the hesitation in the back of your head that comes from the society around you. How am I going to tell my friends? How am I going to explain this? Will
Right.
they be in judgment? Will you ever be able to lead the family business? Or are you always going to be a threat?
Tell me about your grandmother and your husband.
Granny. Everybody should have a granny. My grandmother, Betty Volk, she was Betty Wallach Volk. Her dad founded our family business. She was the only child. And my grandfather died of pancreatic cancer at 59 years old. So he was young. I was 18. Remember, we had generations every 20 years.
Right.
And I broke that, by the way. There's no, I don't have kids. So there was no, that we broke the 20-year mold after many generations. But anyway, the granny was um, very close. And when I started to see John, when I started dating John, and I came out to the family, which was a process that my sister helped. unfortunately, but it was probably just as well. Looking at the universe, like the reasons have things all everything happens for a reason, so it worked out. But there was a lot of hesitation in the family about it, and there was a lot of question, and I didn't feel comfortable coming to the holiday dinner. Well, that was not acceptable. You know, Granny called for dinner, and everybody has to show up, and she didn't care for any reason. So she's like, okay, so Tim's gay, fine. And John, his boyfriend, is lovely. He's an Air Force officer and he's really nice. I think she said he's good looking Italian. We're not
Had
Italian.
taste. She had taste.
And so she liked good looking men. And that was it. That was the end of it. She said, you're coming to dinner. I've told everybody. That was like there was if you thought there was a burden or a hurdle, it had been removed by her. And she so therefore there was no hurdle because she cleared the deck.
All right. Your client families.
Yeah.
First of all, how do they contact you?
Uh you can call me. It's on my mobile, or you can email me, tim.volk@tvolco.com. It's been I think we have the new website for the last year. We have to tweak it a little more. I've also my mobile 312-636-5855. I live in Chicago, and I serve families all over the country.
And that'll be all in the show notes. But I wanted to get to the point of, when do they call you?
When?
When? No, you answered what I asked, which was how can they get you? But when do they call you?
You have all these trick questions. Um, it's a great question. I'd like to think that I help family. The way I would frame it is, even though I have a technical background, I have a deep understanding in wealth management, real estate, banking, insurance. Those are the technical areas that I focused on. The work that I do is really on the human issues that surround families of wealth. Every family has challenges. I think the wealth accents it or enhances the problem. It magnifies it. And so it's helpful for families to think about, how do they want to go forward? What is the plan for us? Do we have a good structure in the family that's going to support the family and nurture the family? How are we going to grow and educate our rising generations to be good stewards in the family? So I think the sooner you get a professional involved, like me, and typically I work on my own, or I work with another a couple friends of mine that we collaborate, depending on what the situation is, whether it's the business itself or the family side. Then it depends on who I involve to help us. But the families call, and typically the engagements start on a project basis, but they're can take up to a year to do the work, and then we make a decision based on that, what the next steps would be, and if they'd like to continue with me. So I enjoy the work. I think takes a little longer than everybody likes to think it's going to take, because I've had some families say, "Oh, I'd like to get it done in 6 weeks." And I'm like, okay, well, how many family members do you want me to interview? Well, I want you to interview everybody. And are they all sitting together? Oh, no, they're all over the country and they're busy and they all have lives. And I'm like, okay, so there's the first hurdle. So it takes a little longer usually.
So they should get to you as soon as possible
Yes, ma'am. That
when
was
they
a short way of
realize
saying
when
that.
they realize there's a problem, or if there isn't a problem
Mm.
even.
Right. I think ideally it's before the problem, but almost always it's because there's a problem. There's always an issue. Either somebody's not happy, they're not getting along. That's the most common. They're not feeling included.
Mhm.
There's some sense of somebody's not belonging. I've also been brought in when the families, the family has a lot of shared stock, or they have a lot of shared ownership in different assets that the family has. So, for example, the grandparents already gave away shares in the family business to the grandchildren. So the parents gave it to their kids, the kids gave it to their kids, but some of it skipped to the grandchildren. So they have,
Oh.
even though there are 3 generations alive, there were 4 generations that owned this company. And so as that has passed on in time, the shares get spread more broadly. And there's not been necessarily a strategy on how you're going to teach what they own. How are you going to get them involved to this company? How is the company going to survive? How is it going to flourish? Is it that they need to be sold? And if it needs to be sold, you got to get everybody to agree to sell it.
Right.
But if you want it to continue, which a lot of families do, and I applaud that, I think it's logical, then you got to figure out who's going to run it, what the roles are going to be. You have to coordinate the family around the business. So you have the shared ownership, you have a board of directors, you have a management team. They're different roles. Sometimes it's hard for the family to put those together. We help them do that.
All right. Well, we were going to do a part 2 about Tim, the agent of inclusion.
Perfect.
So we will. But right now we've got, you gave them the way to get in touch with you once already. It will be in the show notes. Give us your email again.
My email address is tim.volk, VOLK, at tvolkco, TVOLKCO.com.
All right. So listen to part 2, and you will know when part 2 is ready for you. If you follow this podcast, you will be told when it's ready for you.
Yeah.
And of course, share this podcast too with others.
Please
Thanks
do.
for being with us.
Thank
Be
you.
inclusive too. Be inclusive.